And as Tony Bertley reports from the city of Benghazi, fresh allegations of torture and cruelty under Gaddafi's regime are emerging.
As Benghazi embraces freedom and a new future, the dark secrets of a gruesome past are coming to light. Below ground, the burned-out cells of the state security apparatus, where acts of incredible brutality were performed in the name of the Libyan leader.
Torture had no limits, but Gaddafi didn't know about all of the cases. Those in power were afraid of losing their positions, so they would torture people to stay in power.
Torture was the feared method to keep the population under control, and it was inflicted widely. Mohammed Abdullah Ali suffered from this. He was imprisoned a total of 3 times and subjected to brutal beatings which left him with serious deformities and nerve damage. This is how he looked before.
They tied me by my hands, grabbed me by my hair and beat me on the face until I started to bleed, then continued to beat me with the back of their rifles on my face.
They destroyed his body, but not his spirit. Every town had state security, every town had fear. Even though the cells were below ground in the dark, the screams of the victims could still be heard on the nearby streets. The most favoured method of torturing was to hoist a victim into the air upside down and beat the soles of their feet until it was impossible for them to walk. And after a few days of such inhumane cruelty, men and women were prepared to admit just about anything. This device was used to torture several prisoners at once, strung like a washing line across the victims and used until they confessed to whatever they were accused of. 3 of Zakaria Alanjani's aunts and 4 of his uncles were tortured by state security. His grandfather was killed by them. He still doesn't know why.
We don't want Gaddafi dead. We want him alive. We want to know where our families are buried, why he killed them and who gave him that right.
That's what many want. Benghazi has suffered before at the hands of Gaddafi's state security. 1,200 civilians were killed in 1996 after a failed rebellion against autocratic rule. Bodies disappeared. Few details were known until now. Khadija Sakhli's 27-year-old son Yusuf was shot and arrested 15 years ago. He was never seen again. Last year, the family was given a certificate stating he was dead, but no explanation.
I haven't seen him since he got shot in our house. They took him to Tripoli. We went to get him, but they said he wasn't there.
The prisons and torture cells of liberated Libya now stand empty. Their gruesome secrets of cruelty and inhumanity now open to the world. A sad indictment of a leader who long ago lost the love and respect of his people. Tony Bertley, AlJazeera, Benghazi.
Well, the White House has said that U.S. ships are being moved to waters closer to Libya. And the U.S. Secretary of State has warned that Libya might descend into civil war and says that imposing a no-fly zone over Libya is still being considered. However, Russia and China have voiced their concerns over this. Well, let's join John Terrett, who's live for us in Washington. John, the U.S. administration being quite defensive over its response to events in Libya?
I think that's very fair, Imran, forced onto the back foot a little bit today, starting with Jay Carney, who is the new White House spokesperson here in Washington. He was busy ramping up the pressure on the Gaddafi regime and the Gaddafi family when he became as irritated as I've ever seen him, which is not very irritated, by the way. He's a very cool guy, but he was a little bit irritated by an accusation contained within a question from a White House journalist that the administration is moving too slowly and has been too ineffective over Libya. After all, Colonel Gaddafi is still there. And Jay Carney cited the fact that there's been an awful lot going on and the rapidity of events over the last 10 days. And he said, you know, not everything that we do is wrapped up in a speech or an announcement, making it clear that there are plenty behind-the-scenes diplomatic efforts going on. And then just before Mr. Carney spoke, the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, was giving testimony on Capitol Hill before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and she too was defending the White House's handling of the Libyan situation. She said the country's at a crossroads. There are many options open, but none of them have been firmly decided upon just yet. And of course, she's just back from Geneva, where she's been counselling other world leaders, so she knows exactly how the rest of the world feels about moving forward in a post-Gaddafi world. Mrs. Clinton said Libya has a chance to either take the democratic route or descend into chaos and civil war. Here's more of what she told the House Foreign Affairs Committee today.
In the years ahead, Libya could become a peaceful democracy, or it could face protracted civil war, or it could descend into chaos.
Lots of possible options, John. But if push came to shove, what would the Pentagon be prepared to do militarily?
Well, we heard a few hours ago from the Defense Secretary, who is Robert Gates, and he gave a fairly rare press briefing at the Pentagon. He said that he is sending in ships and Marines who are being drafted over from Afghanistan to join a fleet of U.S. vessels that will sail up and down the North Africa coast as the U.S. imposes sanctions against the Gaddafi regime and also considers with the rest of the world about what to do over the no-fly zone. Now, Admiral Mike Mullen, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was with him, agreed with Mr. Gates that imposing a no-fly zone over Libya will be very, very difficult. And Mr. Gates said that there is, in fact, no consensus within the international community either for a no-fly zone or how one might be organized and achieved. Here's Robert Gates.
I would note that the UN Security Council resolution provides no authorization for the use of armed force. There is no unanimity within NATO for the use of armed force. And the kinds of options that have been talked about in the press and elsewhere also have their own consequences.
Defense Secretary Robert Gates speaking at the Pentagon. And finally, I would note that the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton appeared to me anyway to be rather more adamant about the fact that they are looking into a no-fly zone and how to organize one than her Secretary of Defense was. Imran, back to you.
Thanks for that, John. John Terrett live from Washington, D.C. there. To Yemen now, where a leading cleric has joined the country's opposition movement. Demonstrations have been ongoing in the Yemeni capital, and now the president is blaming Israel and the U.S. for the unrest. Hashim Al-Barra reports from Sana'a.
President Saleh offering a new explanation to the pro-reform movement sweeping the Arab world. A conspiracy, he says, led by the Israelis and the Americans to undermine the Muslim world.
There is a media control room in Tel Aviv, which is the cause of all these problems sweeping the Arab world, and the protesters are just mimicking them. These events are managed by the White House. We hear statements by President Obama asking the Egyptians to do this, then telling the Tunisians to do that. This is none of your business, Mr. President. You are the President of the United States, not the Arab world.
President Saleh challenged the opposition to let the people decide who should represent them in new elections. An offer brushed aside by the opposition and the anti-government protesters who once again converged on this square near the university campus asking for Saleh's departure.
Mr. President, if you love your country and care for its unity, and if you are genuine about preventing bloodshed, go. Nobody wants you. You will eventually have to go.
We are in a situation where the government and the protesters stand their ground. President